Today's interview is just kick-ass, and I'm so glad you're here. It's with René Morkos. He is the founder of Alice Technologies, and he has a PhD in artificial intelligence applications for construction from Stanford University. He's a second-generational civil engineer with 15 years of construction experience that is divided between industry and academia. And at Alice Technologies, they're all about scheduling. It's a new era in construction scheduling. And so we dive into the 4 paradigms of construction scheduling and really the importance of having a mindset shift between being task-based when it comes to construction scheduling to being constraint-based. And I don't feel like I'm really doing justice to the substance of what we're talking about in the interview. I just got done with the interview and it kind of stimulated a lot of my thinking. And I know this is going to stimulate a lot of your thinking. We begin the interview with a discussion about one of René's recent trips to climb a mountain and how that relates to him going after this big problem in construction of scheduling. And I know you're going to really enjoy this interview. I encourage you to listen for the full 45 minutes because there are nuggets of insight and wisdom scattered throughout the discussion that are going to help you in the way that you think about your business, your life, and construction itself. So be prepared to be enlightened and refreshed. Thanks for listening to Construction Genius today. Share it with other people. You must share this interview with other people. It is that good. And now to my conversation with René. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. René, welcome back to Construction Genius.
Hi, Eric. Great to be here. Really enjoyed our last conversation. Good to be back.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And just to give the audience a quick heads up, we're going to dive into the 4th paradigm of construction scheduling today. But before we do that, René, you had a wonderful trip to the Matterhorn of the Himalayas, Amadablam. Is that how you pronounce it? Tell us about that.
Yeah, Amadablam. It means mother's necklace. Yeah, that mountain has enchanted me. It's consistently voted the most beautiful mountain in the world. It's this giant sort of spot. It's the Matterhorn of the Middle East. It's, you know, Toblerone chocolate, that sort of mountain that's on the Toblerone chocolates, looks like it, but it's not in Switzerland. It's not in the Alps. It's in the Himalayas. Amazing trip. We basically flew into Kathmandu, and then 17 days later came back. Yeah, really just incredible. You know, Camp 2 is one of the most famous camps in the world. It's just this rocky it's kind of like rock that they just like put these little tents on. And I learned that I used to think that you need to put a tent on a flat surface, but apparently that's not the case. You can just put it on a bunch of rocks. So
let me ask you this though, René. Why do you do these types of trips? Because you know, like I've done some hiking before and some climbing. I've climbed Mount Whitney. I've climbed Mount Shasta. So those are relatively high mountains, but the one in the Himalayas that's an intense commitment of time, effort, and obviously there's a lot of danger associated with that. What drives you as far as doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, on the danger part, like nothing's safe, but on these sort of mountains that have guided expeditions, you know, the safety is. I mean, you know, these folks have been doing it for 40 years without incident. So let's kind of just put that into perspective. Mountaineering is one of these strange sports where nobody skydives without a license. Nobody scuba dives without a license. For some reason, people think that they can waltz up a 7,000-meter mountain, you know, and sort of outwill it. And so that's one principal reason why you see a lot of these accidents. Why do I do it? The same reason I entrepreneur. I like the hacking at something large repeatedly over and over again to get it to work. I could have exited the company, you know, earlier, but I mean, the funny thing for me is if I sell the company, I'll literally look for the next thing. And
Yeah.
the large, painful, nauseating aspect of it is I like it. That's really like I like getting the shit kicked out of me. Excuse my language. You know.
Yep. No, it's great. It's great. It reminds me of something that Elon said recently, or at least I don't know when he said it, but something about his success is tied to his ability to endure pain.
It's funny. I have a different one I say to myself. Success is about how well you can lie to yourself.
Okay, tell us about that. What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's a mind game. Like, there's no one in the world wants to work 18 hours a day. You might for a week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, 1 year, 2 years, whatever the heck it is. Like, at some point, you want to tap out, and then it's a mind game. It's well, I'm doing it because X or Y or whatever. Internally, when you're climbing these mountains like Amada Blam, absolutely nauseating endeavor. Like, there's no aspect of this that's like pleasant. The minute you get to 5,000 meters, it's just painful, miserably so. Every step's painful. Like, lying in bed is painful. You're not feeling well. When you sleep, you got to wake up gasping for air. It's a painful process. But when you're halfway up the mountain, there's lots of reasons you want to turn around. Yeah, I'm not feeling the cough and the flu, and if I go a little higher, maybe the flu will get worse, or whatever. That's kind of how the brain works. But to me, a lot of these sort of endeavors is like finding some reason within yourself to keep going, some game. Like, I want to see how far I can push it. So I want to see how far I can go. Or like a favorite one of mine is this little voice in my head is like that. Is that all you got? Is that all you are? And I usually come back very angry and go, no. I got more. Um, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. It's not real. It's in my head. But I think that's a lot of what success boils down to, which is that how can you set it up internally? What are the mechanisms, or what is the story that you need to tell yourself to keep going?
How do you think the story that you have to tell yourself, how does that differ? And I'm thinking of you as the founder of your company, the CEO. How does that differ from the story that other people in your company need to tell about themselves?
It's a really interesting question, Eric. Somebody recently asked me, like, what is how do we motivate people? What is our culture? And I said something that I think would shock most people. I said, not everybody at Alice Technologies is dying to build construction tech. And that's sort of interesting. So, well, what do you mean? You're the founder. You got to sell everybody in the vision. And I said, not really. There's 70, 80 people at the company. Every single one of these people has a slightly different reason for doing what they're doing. One of the things I can tell you is that one commonality across the field is is everybody wants to pick a really big, difficult challenge that has a large impact. That is what they're passionate about. It just so happens that construction tech is the medium that they found to express that part of themselves. But something that's common across everybody at the company is they're all a little bit out of the box. They're all a little bit quirky in some way. They all have like some sort of cool hobby, right? They like to push the envelope. They really like want more for more. They're willing to take a bigger risk. They're willing to work a few extra hours, and that's common. Um, and so to answer your question, like, every person in the company has their own reason for doing what they're doing. And interestingly enough, I don't try to take that individuality away from anybody. I don't come in and tell them what you have to love is that we are building the best construction scheduling software in the world. Because trust me, like 30, 40, maybe as high as 50% of the people at the company are there to do that. But even at the executive level, some people are like, you know what I really care about is I'm working with a top-notch team, working on a top-notch, problem, applying really deep tech technology to solve something. It's something real. It's not a toy.
It's interesting because it seems like what you've been able to do is to identify one focus point, which is everyone wants to pick a big, difficult challenge to work on.
Mhm.
But then when you peel the onion of the why for each one of them, it could be different reasons why. And that's okay because we're agreeing on that one big why.
Mhm.
Is that right?
It's 100%. I mean, like, what I tell everybody in management is pick your style and stick to it. Whatever style you have, stick. Do not change style. That's the worst thing you can do, because if you have a certain given style, the people that work well with that will be the ones that get attracted to you and work with you. And for me, for example, like people are like, oh, you should have this reality distortion field. You should tell everybody how this thing is going to be worth a bazillion gazillion dollars. Interestingly enough, when I pitch people to join the company, I'm like, look, it's going to be painful. It's going to be miserable. There's a lot of days that you're going to wonder, what the bleep did I get myself into? The highs are high and the lows are low. But on the days that it's working, you will have the privilege of having built and created something that few people get to do. We are a small group of people that has figured out how to optimize 10% of world GDP. That happens once in a lifetime. And so here's something interesting you know what I do for a living? I'm a miner, and I mine for a substance. I look for it. The people that follow me, there's a tiny, tiny smidgen amount of that substance. An entire room full of people might have a microgram of it. And people follow me. They follow me into the darkness, into the caves. It's muddy, it's cold, it's the chances of success are small. We're up against companies that are far better funded. We're up against serious technological, risks, et cetera, et cetera. But when you hit that substance, when you find it, that stuff changes history. That's the stuff that like you can plug armies into. And when people come to Alice, like oftentimes they will sign the contract and I start sort of pushing them, and they dig into themselves, and oftentimes they reach a point where they break. They're like, I don't want to do this anymore. But here's what's interesting. It's that's where the growth happens. And what's interesting is that one of two things happen. Option A, they come back and they say, you suck, just the typical, the weather, I was hitting a golf ball, it was the wind, it was the weather, it was the mountain, it was the snow, it was, it was everything else, you all suck, the game wasn't fair, blah, 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 and they exit. And the other option, and that's what I think most people don't get, because they're like, well, what do you mean you're breaking people? What do you mean people are driven to like points of like, no return? And what I tell folks is a lot of people that work at Alice in some ways want that. I wanted it. I wanted it when I started my PhD, and the folks that drove me to the PhD did that to me. What was interesting about them is they didn't really care whether I was doing better than them or not. They just kept telling me, you can do better. And I would produce something, and they're like, yeah, that's not good enough. You can do better. And so what's interesting is that in that second option, what arises from the ashes is someone who's gone through that next growth, and like suddenly they're invincible, and they go, I really want this. I want this like challenge. I want to be able to do this thing that we're doing. And that's what I do. I mine for that substance. And I help people find it within themselves.
So what you're mining for is that invincibility. Is that what you're saying?
The why. The name of the game is the why. Most people are like, oh, well, if I found the thing I love, right, then everything would be easy. That's the biggest fallacy that people, I think about. It doesn't work that way. I hated civil engineering at one point. Like in my third year in my bachelor's degree, I was like, man, I hate this thing. I never want to do it ever again. I'm just going to finish this degree and never want to see it. I put 15,000 hours of my life into it during the PhD. Oh my Lord, it's beautiful. You want to love something? Put 15,000 hours of your life into it.
It's interesting because people come to this point in life where they have, like you say, option A, which is almost to project on others and circumstances and allow other people and circumstances to control them. And then option B is to look within and to, so to speak, go through that death and accept that, which then leads to the rebirth or the life. And in that rebirth and in that resurrection is the power.
You can tell. Like literally that person will come to work, and they're wearing a $9 Casio watch. They suddenly are wearing like black t-shirts. They're suddenly like, it's just, they're suddenly entirely mission driven. There's a depth of satisfaction from doing what they do. That's cool. It's cool to watch. And like, hey, not everybody gets there. Not everybody gets there.
Hey, this is Eric. Hope you're enjoying my conversation with René. Quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. Effective, hands-on, practical, simple. No BS leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. This book is the one book that every construction leader must read, and the reason why is because if you take one chapter a month, read the chapter, use and apply the information that you learn. Come back the next month and take the next chapter and do the same. Over a year, you'll see the quality of your leadership radically improve. Don't just read the book yourself, but buy it for every single leader in your organization. If you buy 10 or more copies, send me an email and say, Eric, I bought 10 or more copies, eric@constructiongenius.com. I will come into your office via Zoom with your leaders and do a Q&A on the book and a bonus training session. So let's say you buy 10 books. That's only $200. I would normally charge $3,500 for an hour of my time. You get it for $200. It's going to be killer. It's going to tremendously benefit your business. So go out to Amazon and buy the book. There's a link in the show notes, and make sure that you share it with everyone in your organization. Okay, back to my conversation with René. Let's talk about then that optimization of the 10% of the world GDP, which is construction. And I want to pivot to this idea of the 4 paradigms of construction scheduling. And so why don't you just kick off and give us some insight into that framework there?
I think when people look back at the evolution of construction scheduling, and as a company, we started to push back and say, look, you're not actually scheduling, you're really simulating. Right? That's sort of what you really want to do. What people find is that they will have gone through 4 phases. The first is people are doing it with paper and pencil. Henry Gantt was doing this in the
Can I just
early
stop you real
1900s.
quick? Can I stop you, René? Why is it important for people to understand the distinction between those 2 words there? Interesting, scheduling and simulation. Why is it important to think of it in terms of simulation?
Oh, yeah. I think it's a huge leap forward for the industry. So thanks for pointing that out. Scheduling is, I got a list of tasks. I'm putting them together. I'm trying to roughly shuffle them such that they correspond to an accurate way to build this building. The challenge there is that you're not really modeling reality. It's sort of an abstraction. It's a set of tasks. You might not be modeling labor. You know, might not be modeling equipment. There, constraints could be violated either because you didn't see it or because you didn't model them. With simulation, one of the famous computer scientists at Stanford, I'm blanking on the name now, said, if you really want to understand a problem, model it in a computer. Because if you've modeled in a computer, then you've really understood it. If your computer simulation looks like reality, then you've really figured out how the darn thing works. And for us, if you want to optimize construction, you first want to start with simulation. You want to say, I want the computer to build this building for me 6 million different times accurately. If you can do that, then you can now start optimizing, and you've correctly accounted for all the variables. That's why we think it's such a big difference between scheduling and simulation. An output of a simulation is a schedule. An output of a simulation is a 4D model. An output of simulation are analytics, but there's a difference between creating the schedule directly or creating a simulation that can be viewed through the lens of a schedule. And the simulation is basically creating reality, and that's why I think it's such a big leap forward.
A simulation is creating reality. That's interesting. Okay.
Or replicating
back to that.
Reality maybe is more accurate.
Replicating. Okay. Yeah. Replicating. There you go. I interrupted you. We were talking about the 4 paradigms of construction scheduling, and we were just getting into the first one.
Yeah. So Henry Gantt needed to manage war production during the First World War. So started using Gantt charts. So paper and pencil, we started with that. 1980s, folks computerized the critical path method. Pretty cool. You could now sort of model a bunch of tasks. You could change precedence relationships. You could copy tasks. You could do a bunch of cool stuff like that. Then we, as Alice Technologies, invented a 3D-based, effectively visual constraint modeler. You could take a BIM, take a 3D. You could add a bunch of constraints to it, and then hit the simulate button, and the darn thing would build the project for you. 6 million different ways: 1 cranes, 2 cranes, overtime, no overtime. The best way to think about it is what we now call Alice Pro, the 3D software, did for construction what BIM did for design. For the first time ever, you could change a variable, like add a crane, add a crew, try overtime, hit the button, and it would resimulate it for you. The 4th paradigm is what we released 4 weeks ago, publicly. We've been working on it, with our beta customers for a couple of months, 3 months. It's the ability. What we asked ourselves was, okay, it's really, really great, this paradigm we brought to the world, the ability to kind of reschedule. Most people don't think of it as strange, but you can't ask your schedule, hey, there's a delay, what do I do? What the heck? I mean, the point of the software should be to tell you how to get out of a delay. And so we figured that out. We cracked that nut with the original scheduler, with the Alice Pro. What we sat down 12, 14 months ago and thought to ourselves, like, wouldn't it be cool if you could take that juice, you could take that AI constraint-based optimization and apply it directly to an existing schedule. As you can imagine, it's tricky because a really good analogy for this is imagine that the constraint-based world is a 3D object. Imagine that the task-based world is a 2D drawing. You're effectively asking for 3D transformations in a 2D world.
Okay, just go back. Hold on a second, René. Just go back and repeat that, what you just said, constraint based and task based, and put it in 10th grade language for me.
So what we built with the 3D version of our software was the ability to model constraints. Labor, equipment, materials, calendars, crane radii, crane locations, producible material, reusable material, consumable material, overtime, that kind of stuff. Some of these things are quote in existing schedulers, like existing schedulers do have calendars. The truth is that the way that these constraints are modeled in existing schedulers are really bad, to put it mildly. Like you can't go to an existing schedule and say add a crane or change the crane radii or model reusable materials or change production rates globally or do a bunch of stuff that way. So the constraint-based universe unlocks this very versatile, very powerful way of being able to simulate projects. Right. If you want to simulate reality, if you want to basically, mimic reality, you need to be able to tell the software, hey, here's how the world works. Here's how labor, equipment, materials, production rates, all those kind of things work. To do that, you have to basically speak in the language of constraints. Now, when you go to existing schedules, they're usually a list of tasks, and they have precedence relationships. That's really how things are modeled. Now, from a theoretical perspective, what's happening is, for some reason beyond me, our field uses precedence. So to do B, I must complete A first. That is called a precedence relationship. We use precedence relationships to resolve all constraints. Everything is kind of like twisted into the lens of precedence. So labor, equipment, calendars, production, like all that stuff is just jammed into precedence. It's a horrible idea. There's a lot of that's why our field doesn't have this advanced AI stuff. So when we thought to I'll put it this way. When I was first on uncovering this, I called a guy from operations research, PhD at Stanford. And he came over. There's a common area in the dorms. And I sat down, I started explaining this to him. And he listened to me for 20 minutes and he gets up and he says, why the bleep would you ever want to use precedence to resolve resources? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And he walked out the room. The reason it's a bad idea is that you can't reschedule, you can't query, you can't change, you can't modify. Like we've, from a construction analogy, we've basically poured concrete on the problem in order to make it the most unpermutable uh, formulation of the problem possible. We take a computer, which is good at permutations, and then we basically give it a problem. We define the problem in such a way that the computer can't permute. It's crazy. Like here's basically an example of how it works. If you've got three tasks A, B, C, you have one carpenter. So if I got one carpenter, in current scheduling software, I draw an arrow from A to B, B to C. Let's assume A, B, C need carpenters. So draw an arrow from A to B, B to C. Cool. Did the software try B, A, C, C, B, A, A, C, B? Like there's lots of other sequences. In order to do that today, you got to go in and delete that arrow and redraw the arrow. That's a simple example. This is the simplest example of how using precedence locks your problem in so you can't really permute. Now we figured out how to do that. This example I gave was labor. We figured out how to do that with like calendars and overtime and production related, everything, the whole thing, the whole shebang. The challenge we were facing was like, okay, but people loved it. People were like, guys, we really love this vision that you have for the industry, taking 3D models, setting up these constraints and simulating everything. It takes weeks to set up. Also, doesn't integrate with existing systems. So we thought to ourselves, okay, what do we need to do to integrate with this? Like, could we take this constraint-based universe and apply it to a list of tasks? It's tricky because a list of tasks doesn't, like, existing systems don't define crane radii. There's no way to do that. There's no box. There's no entity called crane inside of an existing schedule. There's a number of other such like existing technologies don't define resources in a way that allows you to do this constraint-based stuff. So we're like, okay, well, the first is we don't know if it's possible. So that was 12 months ago. However, if we figure it out, like, holy schmoly, we'll be able to ingest an existing schedule, not have to, set up a 3D, not have to do anything, literally hit simulate. Like that's a pretty, I'd say, lucrative pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Long story short, we cracked it. We figured out how to do it. We built this darn translation layer between the old and the new world, between the constraint-based and the task-based world. And we now have the ability to ingest schedules and just start optimizing the bleep out of them. Well, the thing that's crazy, like, I mean, it's been like, I'm still blown away by it. Our setup time used to be like several weeks. Small job, 2 weeks. Medium job infrastructure, 4 weeks. Heavy industrial, $300, $400, $500 million, like 8 weeks, 10 weeks. Like that's literally setup time. That's what we would go to clients. We're like, hey guys, it's gonna take us 8 weeks. We're gonna hammer it out. We're gonna do this. You know, our guys are gonna, drink some beer, chew some gum, whatever they need to do. They're gonna get it out, right? I've literally gone to a point where I like go to a meeting and I'm like, I don't wanna tell you anything. I want to show you. Do you have a schedule? Perfect. Let me have it. We've learned to sign the NDA before the meeting. Perfect. They give me the schedule. I'll load it in the system. It translates in the constraint-based model, and boom, you're off to the races.
So that's the key there, is getting out of the task-based mindset into the constraint-based mindset. And in that constraint-based mindset, you're thinking more in terms of simulation than you are scheduling.
100%. And what's sort of interesting is that we figured out that the constraint-based mindset through using 3D models. Well, we then went back and said, hey, let's go back. Let's go take a step back and apply constraints to a list of tasks. So you notice that the first paradigm is draw paper and pencil. Second paradigm is task-based systems. Third paradigm is 3D constraint-based. And the fourth paradigm is constraints to tasks. So like the combination of the prior two.
It's interesting to reflect on the need or the perspective of going backwards in order to go forwards. And so thinking about a prior technology and considering the whole technology and what you might take from that, not necessarily the whole thing, but the one aspect of it, which is relevant and which is useful, and take that and build upon it in order to create a new technology or a new approach.
I mean, I can even flip what you said. It's even going forward so you can go backwards. Like we had to go forward into the 3D so we could then step back into 1D task-based list of tasks. But we had figured all of the magic potion in the 3D world. And we stepped back into the 1D world. We're like, can we apply it here? I have a friend who's a philosopher. He just reads a lot of philosophy. I was like kind of explaining to him, we're about to release this new product, and we think that we can kind of bring constraints into task-based and et cetera. And he said, it sounds like you're bringing heaven to earth. I thought that was kind of a nice analogy, right? Like you've moved forward, you've learned all these great, powerful tools up there in the heavens, but now you've brought them back into the stuff that we're using every day.
So let me pursue that, because construction is a very earthly endeavor. and trying to apply heavenly things to an earthly endeavor often can be constrained, since we're using that word, by the earthly nature of the people that you're bringing it to. And so when you're talking through this, I'm thinking about all the complexities that are involved in the construction project that are not only schedule related, but they're also people related. And so how are you introducing this technology into a construction project? What's the best place for you to introduce it so that it gets adopted?
What we're doing today is we literally go talk to the superintendent, the project manager, the scheduler, like whoever the heck is producing or managing or dealing with the schedule. And we go, did you love spending hours and hours and hours going through these things? Because if you do, we're not the tool for you. If you'd like to do this maybe 30 minutes instead of like 6 hours, look, literally upload it, press the button, schedule it.
Are you talking then to the your core client? Is it more on the general contractor side? Is it the specialty contractor combination?
Our business has been historically general contractors and maybe 75% GC, 25% owner. With this, mhm. And the thing that's really, really powerful with this new system is that with a 3D based thing, the owner would say, okay, great, like I will create this new separate universe, the constraint based universe, and then have a conversation with the GC. In some cases it works, in some cases it doesn't. With this new approach, the owner says, I'm not creating anything new. Can I have your schedule, Mrs. GC? Great. And then within 15 minutes, the owner can say, well, Mrs. GC, did you consider the fact that you need this many resources? Did you consider the fact that if you actually reschedule it, resequence, it could look like this? You know, I'm not telling you what to do, but just FYI, if you try overtime in the month of October for steelworkers, it seems to have a outweighed impact, right, on schedule duration or cost. So that's the kind of stuff you can start doing with it. We used to target projects, Eric, that were 100 million and up. Nowadays, like I'm having a conversation with folks that are doing projects for 1 to 10 million. The speed, like back in the day, if I want to set it up, I need to spend 4 weeks setting it up. You can like, I mean, that cost got to go somewhere. Now I spend 30 minutes. Like if you were working on a small job, it just financially wouldn't make sense to hire us as people that were running it for you. Now it's like crazy. The one thing is that a lot of like it, obviously if you want to optimize construction projects, you'll want to optimize resources. And so you can either import resource loaded schedules, or we have a patented or we're thinking of filing a patent for a system that can rapidly optimize the resource loading for you.
It's interesting because as you're saying this, I'm thinking about how as technology develops, it becomes more accessible. The more sophisticated it gets. So you take again, my phone, right? Everybody has one of these now, and this would blow your mind. 20 years ago, even that every single person on the planet would have this. And the way you're describing it, where your target has changed because of the development of your technology from those large, complex projects to perhaps even something pretty simple and straightforward.
It's funny, over the last 4 months, I've often thought of like Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or so, it's got to be usable and easy. Like I don't like, yes, I get the tech is impossible and it's never been done, it's never been solved by anybody, but not only do I want you to solve the unsolvable, but I need you to package it in a pretty way. And it's really, really interesting that I've come to the exact same conclusion. It's like we like when people are like, what do you mean you're going to convert construction to algorithmic terms? Like, what do you mean you're going to convert construction to generalized constraints that you can then plug in the computer? Like, you could never, I've heard this. You could never explain to the computer the complexity of a construction project. Like the thing that I do in my head as a human, like there's no way you could explain that to a computer. It's impossible. Literally, we did it. And it's been done in every other field, FYI. What's interesting though is that we did it, but until it was like press the button easy, the adoption was slower. There's a certain that you can't give it to the masses, so to speak. With this thing we just released, we've now packaged it in a way that's like literally press the easy button.
Yes. Yep. Tell me about just how did you get over that constraint, or not the constraint, excuse me, the mindset that construction is different, because we hear that so much.
You're hitting a nerve. Like that just drives me up the wall. If I read one more friggin' construction publication that has the following words: we are a magical, mystical unicorn. We build unique structures that have never been seen by anybody anywhere ever in the world, in the past or the future, you know, history of our species. It's custom made factories that are far away from anything, unique structure. Like, what a pile of BS. Like that just drives me up the wall. And I think that that's been a really big mistake that we've propagated in the industry. And I bet my career in proving that wrong. And God, like I've poured concrete on 4 continents. I've done it in Afghanistan, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Prague, Amsterdam, LA, San Francisco. There's one way to pour a concrete column. One, you're going to put the rebar, you're going to put the formwork, you're going to pour the concrete, you're going to strip the concrete, you're going to strip the formwork. That is the only way to pour concrete in the world. And the thing that I bet my career on was that, hey guys, yes, I get that the way the elements come together are very different from building to building, but the truth of the matter is a lot of that stuff is not that different. concrete slabs are concrete slabs, columns are columns, right? Like even facades have standardizations. And so that's the part where I really like, I mean, you really hit a nerve with that, right? Which is like, guys, we can't keep for the, till the, rest of time, resting our laurels on this excuse. Like, oh, it's just too complicated. There's nothing we can do about it, right? Like, no, other fields have done it. If you look at factories in the 1900s, there were shitty places to work. You had to work 18 hours a day. Like my grandma in the Czech Republic would tell me, like, yeah, back in the Industrial Revolution, like that, her parents, her grandparents, would work, 14-hour, 16-hour days in the factories, and they were crappy places to work. Digitization, optimization, etc. Nowadays, you think of factories as high-tech places. And the same thing is happening under our very feet. This has happened in construction today. What happened in manufacturing in the 70s, 80s is happening in construction today. And it's great. It's great to see. I'm so happy when I see other construction when I see startups that are in scheduling, I'm like, this is great. I'm so happy. I wish there was 10 times as many of us in the world. I'm good friends with a number of them. We send them business, they send us business, we co-market with them. It's a 13 trillion, $14 trillion industry. It just needs 100 times more, startups, 100 times more people. But I'm so glad that like finally, you know, both the younger generation is going after creating these technologies, and the older generation that are sitting in these companies is willing to try it and go for it. And folks like you are evangelizing it. It's the most exciting time to be in construction in the last 2 millennia. Friggin' awesome.
So then let me just give you a little pushback on what you're saying. And so some of the mindset that you're up against is this mindset that, yeah, I get it that a concrete slab is a concrete slab, but my crew in Kandahar are completely different than my crew in Lisbon or my crew in London or my crew in Washington or my crew in Sacramento. And so the sub base is different, union, non-union is different. All those things are different.
The production rates are different. The language is different. Yeah, sure. So what? Why can't you simply have those as variables in your system that you can change? So what? Like literally, if you want to pour, like, why can't you just say, okay, well, pouring a concrete slab requires 5 tasks, and depending on where you are in the world, here's what those tasks will look like. Like that's the leap. That's the part where I'm like, guys, like it's doable. Not only I've proven it, I've done it. Alice Technologies, Alice Pro was the proof that it's doable. The question that I often invited people to ask me is, how many times do we encounter a constraint that we can't model? I.e., somebody gives us something and we're like, ooh, our system doesn't know how to do that. Never. It doesn't happen. Literally. That means that we've solved it. You can literally take construction, put it into a computer. We found the language in which to do that in. And that like excuse that the industry has sort of over and over and over said, which is, oh, it's too non-standardized. Like, guys, other fields that are non-standardized have done this, right?
So this is interesting because again, this goes back then to transforming your thinking from task-based to constraint-based. And if you can embrace that constraint-based way of approaching any project, then like you just said, all you're doing is identifying and describing your constraints and taking those into account as you are building your project.
This is exactly what my PhD was. So the reason people think it's impossible, it's like, well, how could you possibly, define a million different constraint types? Like your software would need to have 1 million buttons or 10,000 buttons for it to be useful. That's why it's impossible. I agree. If you wanted to model every single constraint type itself, then yeah. But the truth of the matter, it turns out that if you model construction as elements that are constrained by physics, so some elements sit on top of each other. You can't build the roof before the foundation. So elements constrained by physics that need tasks and resources to get built. If you model your construction that way, a lot of times people are like, oh, but like I see, Alice could probably be used in only commercial buildings or only parking lots or only tunnels. Like, Eric, it doesn't matter. We've run it, like it literally doesn't matter. We've run it on data centers, parking lots, high rises, skyscrapers, tunnels, bridges, hospitals, airports. Like it doesn't matter. It's an element sitting on top of other elements, and you need some tasks and resources to build it. And there's some resources available to do so. If you model a problem that way, suddenly you start seeing that there's an awful lot of similarity between construction projects. In fact, what blew me away when I did the PhD is that I had converted construction constraints into 3 generalized scheduling constraints. And I kept, when we started the company, I thought to myself, like, oh, well, I'm sure, I'm sure there'll be more. I'm sure
What are
we'll
those
need like,
three? What are those three?
there's 3. There's precedence, disjunctive, and discrete.
Give us the definition of each. We've talked about precedence.
A before, for you to do B, I have to do A, finish A. So for me to, whatever, pour the concrete, I have to finish the formwork. Disjunctive is spatial constraints. Capacity is exactly equal to 1. There's only one space available. So A can happen in the space or B can happen in the space. So they cannot happen at the same time. That's disjunctive. And C is discrete. So discrete because we tend to have 1 cranes, 2 cranes, 1 crew, 2 crews. You don't have 1.5 people. So that's why it's called discrete constraints. So it's a capacity constraint. So if I have 2 cranes, don't schedule 3 crane tasks on Tuesday. And it turns out that I kept like originally when we started the company, we're like, oh well, I'm sure that we'll find like other ones we'll need. Turns out you can boil everything down to this. If there's a weather constraint, right? That delays the time. That delays when you can schedule something. Labor, equipment, material, all discrete constraints. Temporal stuff like when you want to schedule something, you can't schedule things on top of each other. That's disjunctive. You can't paint the wall before you finish it. That's precedence. So you're kind of seeing that you start to translate these things back into like and like the primary constraints I talked about, the discrete, disjunctive, and precedence, right, are mathematical. So computers understand those. The thing that's kind of really cool is like people think construction is like, it's like this kind of, unknown field and it's not very sexy. And once you dig into it, Eric, like, oh my God, like we are actually working on some of the biggest, most complicated problems in the world. Our field is like unmatched in terms of operational complexity, in terms of, you're building a 300, 400, $500 million, project. Very few human endeavors include that many tasks. And so the size and the scale of the stuff that we're working on is mind blowing. But again, it's the uniqueness of it. I'm like, no, guys, like this is, there's a way to mathematically, model these things.
That's great. Tell us a little bit more about how people can get in touch with you and learn more about Alice Core and then your other offerings.
It's really easy. You can get on our website, fill out a contact me or a demo request. Also, you could shoot me an email directly, René@alicetechnologies.com.
Excellent. We will have links in the show notes to Alice Technologies, and René is Rene, so it's nice and easy to remember. René, we started off talking about climbing mountains. What's the next mountain you're going to climb? The physical mountain.
We'll see. Yeah. Ask me next year.
Okay, great. Nothing planned at the moment then.
Nothing planned at the moment. There's some zany ideas, but we'll see what will come out of it.
So then I'll ask you one final question. Your last trip there to the Himalayas sounded awesome. What has been your all-time favorite trip, if you were to pick one?
I don't know. Denali, Afghanistan. Afghanistan was long. I don't know if you can call it a trip. I was there for a year as a civilian. It's like traveling back in time, literally. I mean, you go back 500 years. It's crazy. You get why we're afraid of the dark. You get why we live in tribes. You get like suddenly you're like, oh my God, this all makes sense. Like we were not designed to build, live in these big cities. Yeah, that's really like crazy. In terms of, a trip, like a short one, Denali. This plane has skis and you land, 200, 200 miles away from anything, and you hop out and the plane takes off, and that's it. You're out there.
It's interesting.
18 days.
It's interesting to reflect on just what I picked up there is the effect of those trips to kind of strip away one reality that you live in and put you in a completely different reality, and how that causes you to reflect on your humanness, the human nature, the human condition.
There's 2 little fish swimming by a big fish. And the big fish says, "Good morning, boys. How's the water today?" The little fish swim on, and one of them looks at the other one and says, "What the heck is water?"
Yeah, it's interesting, huh? So that's kind of in a certain way what you're doing with Alice is that you're asking you're the fish asking the other fish, "How's the water?" And you're challenging them to really think through that so that they can have that new perspective. And specifically, the one that I'm taking away that's really cool is this idea of constraint-based versus task-based.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I never thought of it that way. Maybe the fact that I go to these like very weird places like Denali or Afghanistan or Amman, that there's such a shift from the water we live in has helped me shift the construction water we live in, you know? Yeah, I would imagine there's a correlation somehow.
Yeah, so I think perhaps a takeaway for our listeners is, what are you doing to get out of your water and perhaps dive into another water, so that helps you to understand the water that you spent the most time in, that kind of thing, getting out of your box so that you can see things from a different perspective. I'll say this, just in closing, I think that one of the ways you do that is, maybe if you can't take the trips, is that you read books, because what a book can do is it can take you out of your current reality and give you a perspective on your current reality that perhaps you wouldn't have gotten if you hadn't engaged with that book.
What is it? A smart man learns from his mistakes. A wise man learns from the mistakes of others.
Yes. Not sure how wise we all are, though, huh?
What is it that I learned in the PhD? The more you know, the more you know about something, the less and less you know, until you know everything about nothing. Like
Yep. There you
the
go.
more you focus on one thing, you learn more and more about it, but you realize you know less and less. Like the more you learn about something, you realize like, oh my God, there's so much more to learn.
Yes.
It's the novice is confident in their ability. The master is like, I don't know, I failed a bunch.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. There's many things that pop into mind there. I'll leave one thing. Keith Jarrett, who's a jazz pianist, he was being interviewed, and somebody asked him about, people that he looks to, and he's like, yeah, I look to Bach, because compared to Bach, we're all ignoramuses.
Yeah, that's very true.
All right. Well, René, I appreciate you coming on. Look forward to having you on again. I think this conversation is something that everyone who's listened has really benefited from. So I do wish you the best.
Eric, you've got such a special way of teasing out these interviews. I remember our last one was one of my favorites, and I can kind of see why. Really, really pleasure being here. Thanks for having me, and thanks to all the listeners for listening in. Thank you.
Right on. This is Eric. I hope you enjoyed that interview. I know I did. Feel free to go back and listen to it again, because there's so much in there that will benefit you. Reach out to René at alicetechnologies.com. Go out to the website, alicetechnologies.com. Check out Alice Core and Alice Pro. You can tell that René is a deep thinker, and he's working on a big problem, and he's someone to get to know. So make sure you do that. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius here today. Give the show a rating or a review, wherever you get your podcasts. Let's continue on this journey. I think this is episode 278. I'm committed to a minimum of 500 episodes. And so we're just over halfway through. We got some ways to go, and I'm glad you're on this journey with me. Continue pressing on in your construction business to deliver projects on time, on budget, with great quality, great safety. Understand that you are having a tremendous positive impact upon people through the business that you are building. And I encourage you to go out there and continue to pursue excellence. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius here today.